Hello, scientific writers. In today's video, we're going to have a grammar lesson on articles. Articles are one of the most difficult parts of speech in the English language. They really cause a lot of difficulty for a lot of people. As you probably know, some nouns require articles, but what you might not know is when to use an article and also which article to use. So as a refresher, let's talk about what articles are. They are a special type of adjective that are used for nouns. Now, again, not all nouns. And sometimes the same word will require an article in one situation, but not in a different situation. There are three articles. They are a, an, and the. A is pronounced a or sometimes an is pronounced an or sometimes un, and the is pronounced the or sometimes the. Now here is the set of 22 rules, and I'm going to back off and not say that they're rules, but they're more situations or guidelines in which you need an article or don't need an article. You can download this chart. So go to my website and get yourself a paper copy. You can print this out and it's totally free. I'm not even going to ask you for an email. You just find the link, click it, and it will download. The link to my webpage, go to the video description below, and then on that page, read through the page until you find the download section, and then you can download this form. You might want to go and do that right now before you continue with the video, because it'll be helpful for you to have this in front of you as we're going through the exercise. All right, let's go over the first few situations or guidelines. Situation number one, before a word that begins with the consonant sound, you need an A. And consonant sounds include U and ya sounds. Examples for situation one would be the word cat. University starts with a vowel, but the sound is a U sound, so that would also use an A. Contrast that to rule number two, before a word that begins with the vowel sound, and in that case you use an as the article. Some examples are ungulate and x-ray. Now you notice X is a consonant, but the sound is like an E, so it's a vowel sound. So notice I don't say a consonant letter or a vowel letter, I say a consonant sound or a vowel sound. So you have to listen to how it's pronounced to know if you need to use an A or an an. Rule number three is before a singular countable noun, you would use a or an. Situation number four is for nouns that are categories or types of things or people. You would use a or an. So, for example, a scientist or an enzyme. Scientist is a category of careers, and enzyme is a category of proteins. All right, situation number five, for non-specific things or people, you would also use a or an. If it doesn't matter which one, you just say, hand me a pipette tip. So a means any pipette tip out of the box or the bag of pipette tips. Hand me a pipette tip, or hand me an applicator. It doesn't matter which applicator, you just need an applicator. So this is what I mean by non-specific. And number six, before plural nouns, now you're going to use the, or you're not going to use an article. And to distinguish between using an article and not for plural nouns, you'll have to look at some of the other rules that we're going to get to. So plural nouns would be like cats, dogs, pipettes, x-rays, seeds, tubes. So they cannot use a or an. So there's some information that you can gather by seeing which article is used, whether it's a plural or a singular item, and whether it's countable or uncountable. All right, let's look at the next few items, and then we'll get into some examples, and I'll put these into practice. Situation or guideline number 7 is when you have a generalized uncountable noun, you're not going to use an article. So for example, water and air are both uncountable nouns. You can't count the number of air. There's just one big volume of air. Now you can measure the volume of air. Number 8 is for a generalized abstract noun. You do not use an article. Some examples of abstract nouns are knowledge and translation. So these are things that you cannot touch, taste, feel, smell, they're concepts. That makes them abstract rather than concrete. Now, the generalized in Rule 7 or 8 are important because there may be specific times that you would use an article with these words. Situation or guideline number 9 is before a noun that is unknown to the reader, you're going to use a or an. And this is also referred to as the indefinite article. Now combine it with Rule 10. Before a noun that is known to your reader, use the. Situation 11 is before a noun that is unique or superlative, you would use the. Examples of this would be the largest, the third most abundant, and guideline number 12 is when there are other modifiers such as possessive pronouns, demonstrative pronouns, or quantifiers, then you don't use an article. So some examples of those modifiers would be some, there, or this. Let's look at some examples to help solidify these concepts because they are difficult. Let's look at a few examples comparing the indefinite article to the definite article. So comparing a or an to the. And this kind of illustrates why articles are important in English because they contain a lot of information. So here are 4 sentences that are identical except that I have changed the article in 2 different places where it's underlined. I'm going to explain how they're different in meaning to me as the listener. So in the first one, this is a sample I collected from the field yesterday. So being a sample, I know that it's singular. So you're talking about one sample, but I also know that you collected more than one sample. So you're talking about a single sample, but I know that you have lots of different samples. Secondly, you say collected from the field yesterday. So this is the definite article. That tells me that there's only one field that you visited, or there's only one field that you would visit, and that I already know what that field is. Let's compare that to the second sentence. This is the sample I collected from the field yesterday. So the information about the field is the same as in the first sentence, but the information about the sample is different. Now I know you only collected one sample yesterday. The third sentence. This is the sample I collected from a field yesterday. So that's telling me that you only collected one sample yesterday, but you went to more than one field. And from one of those fields that you went to, you collected the sample. And it seems like you kind of went to these fields randomly, not in an organized way. So you didn't have certain fields chosen to visit specifically. You just were walking by a field and you saw something and you picked it up. That's what it sounds like. For the fourth example, this is a sample I collected from a field yesterday. Okay, so that tells me that you collected several samples or maybe even many samples, and you visited several or many fields. And you're showing me this one particular sample because there's something extra interesting about it. So I got all of that information just from these articles in those sentences. Okay, let's look at some actual examples. So you see the noun in bold, and then this number as a reference is referring back to. So if you haven't downloaded it yet, maybe this is a good time to do that. Here's our first example sentence. To measure absorbance at a certain wavelength, use a spectrophotometer. So the nouns here are absorbance, wavelength, and spectrophotometer. So to measure absorbance, you see there's no article here because that is a generalized abstract noun that takes no article. So absorbance is an abstract thing. You can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't feel it. It's more of a concept. And it's generalized because you're not saying a specific absorbance, you're just saying in general, to measure absorbance, use this instrument. Now the sentence goes on to say at a certain wavelength. So here's the article, a. At a certain wavelength, that's a consonant sound, so it needs an a. That's rule number 1. And rule number 5 is non-specific things or people. It takes a or an. So we're saying at a certain wavelength, meaning we're not specifying a wavelength. For the last one, it says use a spectrophotometer. So this is using an article A. Again, rule 1 because it's a consonant, and rule 3 because a spectrophotometer is a singular countable noun. I can count how many spectrophotometers are in a laboratory. All right, let's look at example 2. Caffeic acid is an antioxidant that scavenges reactive oxygen species, but the underlying mechanism of mediation of tolerance against various abiotic stresses by caffeic acid is only partially understood. Okay, so this is a long sentence, but it's using a lot of these rules or guidelines. So let's go over the rules, why some of these nouns have articles and some don't, and why some of them are using a or an and some of them are using the. All right, so for caffeic acid, we're using rule number 12. When there are other modifiers, possessive pronouns, demonstrative pronouns, quantifiers, etc. Acid is the main noun and caffeic is the modifier. What kind of acid? Caffeic acid. And so we don't need an article for that. It is an antioxidant. Why do we use an? So that would be rules 2 and 4. Rule 2 is before a word that begins with the vowel sound. And rule 4 is categories or types of things or people. So we're categorizing caffeic acid into the category of antioxidant that scavenges reactive oxygen species. So this is a compound noun. It has 3 words in it, but they work together as a single unit. We're not using an article because of rule 6. It's a plural noun. The underlying mechanism, so that has an article. The article is the. That's rule number 11, before a noun that is unique or superlative. So this one's not superlative, but it is unique. It's saying it's the mechanism, meaning it's the only mechanism. There is not another mechanism. There's only this one. That's unique. Now, mediation and tolerance don't have articles, and they're both on rule number 8, and that is a generalized abstract noun, kind of like we had with absorbance in the last example. And then we go to abiotic stresses. So stresses is also following rule 6. It's a plural. And then caffeic acid, again, the same rule we had the first time. Okay, let's look at example number 3. The sentence says, the samples were diluted 10 to 100-fold in sterile water and were used directly as inoculum. So samples is a noun and it has an article, the. That's rule number 10, which is before a noun that is known to the reader. Now, how is this noun known to the reader? Well, in this sentence, it's really not. But by reading this sentence, we know it's taken out of the middle of a paragraph where the samples were introduced in a previous sentence. The next noun is water, and this is a generalized or uncountable noun, so it does not take an article. And then inoculum is the next noun. You see there's no article because it's a category or type. Let's look at a few more rules or guidelines. Number 13 is when you are generalizing with plural nouns, you do not use an article. So the example here is cats are common pets. This is a plural noun and we're generalizing with it. We're not talking about a specific cat or even a specific group of cats. We're talking about all cats. Rule number 14 is to generalize singular countable nouns to mean every single one. Now, depending on the way you're using this sentence, it could be any of the articles, but you do need to use some article. Some examples here are the bat is a flying mammal. Now, we're not talking about one specific bat. This is not the definite article situation. We're talking about bats in general. A scientist is curious about the world. Now, we're not saying that scientist out of a group of 100 scientists is curious about the world. We're saying that a characteristic of a scientist is curiosity. Rule number 15 is when discussing certain body parts or organs as a singular unit, we'll use the, such as the eye, the nose, the lung, the back. Here's another example to look at some of these new rules and some of the previous rules that we already discussed. Rubisco is a protein involved in photosynthesis. This enzyme fixes atmospheric carbon during photosynthesis. The protein is the most abundant protein on the planet. All right, so for Rubisco, this is rule number 16, which we didn't get to yet, but that's all right. And that is, it's a proper name. So we do not use an article with the proper name. Rubisco is a protein. So this rule uses rule number 1 for A with consonant sounds, and rule number 9, which is before a noun that is unknown to the reader. So until we defined Rubisco as a protein, it was unknown to the reader that Rubisco was a protein. Involved in photosynthesis. So no article here, and that's because it's a generalized abstract noun. Then we say this enzyme. So do we have an article there? No. But we are using rule number 12 when there are other modifiers. So this is standing in for an article. So we don't need to use a, an, or the because it has a different modifier in front of it. It fixes atmospheric carbon. So carbon is using rule 12. Again, it has another modifier in front of it, atmospheric. It's also uncountable. In most situations, you can't count carbon. You can measure it, but you can't count it. And then it's during photosynthesis, no article here because, again, this is an abstract noun. Then in the next sentence, we say the protein. You might say which protein. The protein is referring back to Rubisco, which was introduced 2 sentences previously. So now this protein is known to the reader, so we use rule number 10, the definite article. And we say it's the most abundant protein, rule number 11, before a noun that is unique or superlative. In this case, it's superlative. And then we say on the planet, and that's using rule number 10, again, before a noun that is known to the reader. You might say, well, which planet? Well, obviously we're talking about the planet we live on. Example number 5. Lipids are increasingly recognized for their role in brain function. So this is the first time we're seeing rule number 13 put into place. That is when generalizing with plural nouns. So lipids is a very broad category being generalized, and it's a plural. So that fits into rule number 13, and no article is needed. Also, role and brain function do not need an article because there are other modifiers. So function is being modified by brain, and it's also an abstract noun, so it could use rule number 8. And role is being modified by there, so there is standing in for the article. Okay, let's finish off the worksheet. We already foreshadowed proper names do not need an article. These would be things like names of universities or companies or individual people. Proper names that have of in the name do need an article. They need the. So, for example, the University of Nebraska. Names of countries that contain republic, federation, or united, or they're plural, also require the, such as the Philippines, the Netherlands, the Republic of Korea. Academic subjects do not require an article. So if you say biochemistry or chemistry or biology or engineering, you don't need an article. But if you're talking about categories of subjects, you do need the. So the biological sciences would need an article. Individual named mountains, lakes, or bays do not need an article. This is really a subset of rule number 16, but I wanted to bring it out specifically. So Mont Blanc would not need an article, but individual named mountain ranges, seas, oceans, rivers, geographical regions, or environments do need the, such as the Alps, the beach, the countryside. Those are using articles, depending on the context, of course, for the beach and the countryside. You could use beach without an article, depending on its context. But if you're saying, I'm going to the beach, you say the beach. Even though the listener or the reader may not know which beach you're talking about, you're generalizing it. Let's put these new rules into practice. Example 6. The Rongbuk Valley is located on the northern slopes of Mount Kuala Longma, which lies toward the eastern end of the Himalaya. The Rongbuk Valley, that has an article, that's rule number 22, individual named geographical regions, and it's located on the northern slopes. An article for slopes, that's rule number 14, that's generalizing a single countable noun to mean every single one. On any mountain, there are going to be multiple northern slopes. It's not just one single plain. And so they're generalizing, they're saying that all of the northern slopes are part of this valley. Then we have the mountain. That's a proper name that uses rule number 21. It's an individual named mountain. The eastern end, and that's using rule number 11 before a noun that is unique or superlative. So there's only one eastern end. There can't be two eastern ends. So that's a unique end. We need to use the to signal that it's the only one. The Himalaya is an individual named mountain range. It needs the. Another example, example 7, the kidney, under normal physiological conditions, is the major regulator that helps maintain clotho levels. So the kidney, we have an article here that's using Rule 15 when discussing certain body parts or organs as a singular unit. The human body has 2 kidneys. You might say, well, they're talking about one of those 2 kidneys. But no, we're talking about the kidney as an organ system. So the 2 kidneys become one system. And then we go to conditions. We've seen this rule used several times. There's no article because there are other modifiers. And then we say is the major regulator. So that uses rule number 11. It's a unique noun that helps maintain clotho levels. All right, now clotho here is another proper name, even though it's not capitalized, but they're not using it as a noun. They're using it as an adjective for levels. That's why I didn't highlight it or put a rule onto it, because it's not being used as a noun. But levels is a noun. It doesn't need an article because it's a generalized abstract noun. Maybe you could make the case that it also fits under rule number 12, that it's got a other modifier. Clotho is modifying it. Here's another example where we're going to use the rest of the rules. Then we will have covered all of them. The professor is an expert in the life sciences, having earned degrees in biochemistry and genetics from Harvard University and the University of Missouri Columbia in the United States. So the professor, we're using an article, the, and this is using Rule 10 before a noun that is known to the reader. So this is a sentence pulled out of context, but we're going to assume that the professor was previously introduced so that the reader knows which professor we're talking about. An expert, so this has the article an. This is rule number 4, a category or type of things or people. In the life sciences, so that's rule number 20, categories of academic subjects. Degrees has no article. Why is that? Because it's a plural noun. In this case, it does not need an article. And then we have in biochemistry and genetics, both of those nouns use rule number 19. They are academic subjects, so they do not need an article. Harvard University is a proper name. It does not have of in the name, so we don't need an article. But University of Missouri Columbia does have of in the name, so it does need an article. It needs the, and that's rule number 17. And then the United States, instead of just United States, because of rule number 18, names of countries that contain United use the. Okay, I hope all of that made sense to you. It's practice time. So if you didn't download the sheet yet, maybe pause the video, go and get that sheet to practice. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you some more example sentences where you will fill in the situation or guideline number for these examples. Now the test here is not whether you should or should not use an article. If you should use the article, I have it there. If you should not, I don't have it there. So if you want a different video where you can practice determining if you need an article or not, I can make that. Just let me know in the comments below. So here's your first practice. Silicon is an essential micronutrient and is the 3rd most abundant trace element in the human body. The major food sources of silicon include cereals, mineral water, and beer. In contrast, animal source foods such as meat and dairy products contain lower levels of silicon. Now notice that some of these are compound nouns, like trace element, food source, mineral water, animal source foods, dairy products. So don't worry about breaking down each one. You just need to fill in where I have the parentheses. Pause the video here, use the chart, and decide which rule applies in each situation. Okay, here are the answers. And I'm not going to go through all of these rules one by one because you have the chart. You can do that. Here's your next practice. This study was approved by the Institutional Review Board at Oklahoma State University. So which rules apply here? Are you ready? They are rules 12, 11, and 16. All right, how about this one? The hot spring in Bakra is situated in the North Garo Hills district of Meghalaya, India. So which rules apply for these nouns? They are rules 10, 16, and 22. Here's another opportunity to practice. The sentence says, to determine whether podocytes in the glomerulus are one of the sources to express clotho, we analyzed the distribution of clotho in human kidney using immunohistochemistry. So pause and resume the video when you're ready to see my answers. So here we're using rules 6, 3, 11, 16, 12, 10, and 20. So here's your last practice example. In the present study, different morphological attributes of two wheat genotypes were measured under saline conditions with or without the application of acid. So which of the guidelines are going to apply for these nouns? All right, we have 10, 12, and 7. All right, how did you do on the practice? Let me know your feedback on this video. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, do you want to see more grammar videos? Yeah, let's have a conversation in the comments. Just let me know what you like and what you want more of. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. I'll see you next time, and happy writing.